Hey everyone, Blade here, and welcome to my Akechi build guide, where I'll be going over his dupes, skill priorities, best weapons, gear sets, team comps, and more to really help you utilize his abilities if you decide to pull for him or already have. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so getting started, Akechi was the newest and latest addition from the P5R collab to join the P5X crew, being an almighty AoE DPS. Now, this character, without a doubt, as you saw with the title, is both a blessing using character and a curse using character, which sounds like a pretty okay-ish unit as an idea, but instead actually comes with a huge twist in his overall moveset. This unit might as well be just curse and bless, it just built in a whole character itself, but it has the almighty skill that a lot of us were looking forward to seeing here. This almighty skill is going to be the main deal for his entire kit here, and it's dang strong to boot as well. Pretty much he can fit any team as long as you have an AoE DPS present, which really makes him very viable with a lot of different teams, but he does lack a little bit in the damage / help department despite that. But even with this at least against him and has his back against the wall at that point in time, he still gets what you need to have done here. So with this small introduction, we're gonna go ahead and check out what the detective has to offer for himself. All right, so to start, Akechi's entire kit revolves around the fact of actually having a detective's partner. Now, what detective's partner is pretty much a buff here that he is able to put on any character that you so choose here, in which what it actually does, it records the average damage dealt from the selected person you usually chose, so most likely your main DPS, and then it uses this recorded damage dealt for the almighty skill. So as far as you have this stat effect on them, you're able to actually deal a lot more damage, not only with just Akechi himself, but allowing your main DPS to deal that extra damage, seeing you're getting even more so amplifying damage for both Akechi and your main DPS. This is going to be somewhat determined on your base level as well, so you do want to make sure you have your units maxed out to really get the base effects. What I mean by this, it kind of varies from like level 1, level 50, and level 70, so you do want to make sure you have those thresholds of that level to actually make sure you're getting every last bit of those stat effects. Alongside with this here, there is a small bit of information here that you want to take account, mainly because he comes with a little bit of a gimmick. And this gimmick is going to be reliant on his special arrows that's involved in his kit as well. The first being the arrow of clarity, and then the other one is also called the arrow of chaos. Once you go ahead and take a look at both of these here, they are gained during various instances for the most part, one of them being at least using the skill 1, which actually provides you the clarity substat, or at least the clarity status, and the other being the arrow of chaos, which is from the skill 2. Both of these will have their own points and times where you really want to go ahead and use them, and they'll really come in handy once you go ahead and actually deep dive into more of his skill set. But one of these things, or at least both of these things, heavily come into play for is going to be his almighty attack, which is his skill 3. This is going to be your main thing that's for hitting the hardest with Akechi and really helping you out to do that extra damage that your main DPS couldn't get out. Akechi will be able to go ahead and just help out and do the rest of the damage that you do need. It's gonna be your main thing you want to focus down as well, so be sure to kind of keep this in your back pocket to make sure you're getting the best out of his actual usability. So going into his first passive, which is called Law, this allows Crow to trigger a Desire Sonata for any element. Now, if you guys don't know exactly what Desire Sonata is here, it's a little weird when we go ahead and talk about it here, but it's technically like the stances when it looks at Kazumi, but a little different too. So how it does work here is, with certain sonatas here, you do need 2 units of the same element, being the sonata version, or you need all your units being a different element, being the concerto sonata. Now with this is going to do some different effects, so you do have to keep that in mind here, but each of these things allow you to go up to levels. So for example, having the 2 same units essentially will give you the sonata that you need, the sonata effect. Well, that sonata effect goes up by 2 different levels here, which does max out at 2. And by these levels, you actually get more elemental damage. At level 1, you actually increase your elemental damage by 10%. And then level 2, you increase your elemental damage by 12%. Now that's only if you have 2 units with the same element. Now remember that thing that I said beforehand called the Concerto Sonata? Well, that is a little bit different from the Desire Sonatas here. Well, the Concerto Sonata is kind of like a wild card effect. What this allows you to do is increase the elemental damage by 5%, which is a lot lower than the other 2 here. That's mainly just because the Concerto Sonata itself, none of your characters are the same element. They're all going to be different, so you're of course going to get a lot less elemental damage bonus here. But alongside with this first passive here is at the start of the battle, you're also increasing your damage dealt by 15% for every last one that you trigger. So do keep in mind that whether it's going to be a Sonata that is different with all the characters, or a Sonata with 2 of the characters actually different or the same, you're still going to get yourself a decent bit of increased damage dealt out of the Elise equation. So going into his next passive here, the second passive called Desire, this one will focus more on the dealing almighty damage side of things here. So pretty much every 1% of defense down on the target, that will give you more almighty damage, but it also increases the damage dealt by 0.5%, up to a whopping 120%. Now, this sounds really good on paper, but all in all, once you see it in person, it's not too much, at least not for now, until we get, of course, his buff, which will come in the future. Now that I went over this here though, let's go ahead and look into his dupes. Now, when it comes down to Akechi's dupes here, there's not many units I'd say you'd want dupes on here or really need dupes, but surprisingly, this is the one I kind of encourage dupes on. Now, the reasoning for this isn't anything that he's like, oh, he's terrible at A0. No, he's pretty darn good at A0. In fact, his A0 practically is just a basic knowledge of his regular unit capabilities, seeing that with the detective partner system, he will end up prioritizing a single target character and or an AoE DPS, which you very well can choose yourself like I mentioned earlier. And then with this here, Crow is not only gaining 25% detective partner's attack, but also is allowing the detective partner to also deal some equal damage here. Now with this here, he will then end up recording the average damage dealt to all enemies if it is an AoE character, though if it is a single target skill or a single target character, it will actually only record 40% of that recorded damage instead of just their average here. So you do have to keep that in mind. So it's pretty much a help on each side. Crow's helping himself, but he is really helping out the other teammate as well. Alongside of this here at A0 is at the start of the Crow's turn, or at least his turn himself, it will end up actually gaining him 1 stack of clarity, which is based on the total recorded damage. Then it allows him to then record this arrow of clarity lasting 2 whole turns. Now, this will then be utilized later on if you're using his almighty skill, which can help you do more of his damage. And although it sounds really good on paper, it actually hits very low. In the future, I'm pretty sure they're going to be changing this around, or at least giving him some more damage markers. So it should help him out a little bit more. Seeing at A0, it might make him a little bit better, though currently it's in a little bit of a mess state. Now, do keep in mind though, this character is a sub DPS, so he isn't meant to do the most out of it, but for an A0, I really expect this to hit a little bit better for the character. But really where he shines the most is with his A1. Now for the A1 here, which is the preferred way I would say you want to use Akechi, he gains clarity at the start of the battle and extends the duration of clarity and chaos up to 4 turns. When you have both of these effects, it'll then actually increase Crow's crit rate by 16% or 15% if I'm correct here, and increases him even more so with his detective partner's damage bonus by 25%. Now this comes more with a completed type substat or a completed type set for Crow. At this point in time, he's able to deal a little bit more damage, which actually does help out not only him, but helps out his AoE partner or single target partner at the same time. And alongside of this, it actually helps out your partner even more so, getting the 25% attack and crit damage that you really do need, which is really nice. Or at least, sorry, not the attack and crit damage, but the damage bonus as well, which is pretty darn good. That's something that we really want to go ahead and take a look at, but you can only get this, at least part of his kit, at A1, which is why I said this is kind of where you want to have it. Now for the rest of his dupes, they're pretty straightforward, pretty simple, so we're going to go down the list here, but these aren't necessary. For A2, for example, after dealing damage with a persona skill, it actually increases Crow and Detective's partners here attack by 25% and the crit damage by 30% for 1 whole turn. This is pretty darn decent, but once again, not necessary. And we have the A4, which improves his highlight abilities here, additionally allowing it to increase the arrow of chaos damage by 10% for 4 whole turns, which is pretty darn good as well. And then lastly is A6. Akechi then increases his arrow of clarity recorded damage by 50% when using Golden Arrow Rain Annihilate, which is his 3rd skill as well. And all allies are now treated as a detective partner. So no longer it's a 1-person thing. This is an AoE type skill. In this said battle, then it will additionally gain crit rate and crit damage that's over 100% based on the 40% of the highest crit rate and crit damage among the detective partners. So pretty much whoever has the highest crit rate and crit damage here, it will then take 40% of that highest amount which is up to 20% crit rate and 40% crit damage. And that is just going to be a major amount of at least things that you need for crit rate and crit damage to make Akechi really destructive and help out his team at hand. This kind of makes him very strong, but it is definitely a price tag that it's a little bit too much in my book. But for you guys who want to go ahead and get that A6 or already have that A6, be sure to go ahead and enjoy that. But I'm out of that. But now we've talked about at least the dupes, let's go ahead and move on to the skill priority. Getting to the skill priority section here, Akechi really isn't too confusing. He's what a lot of us really thought he would be focusing on here, and that's going to be primarily his skill 3. Now his skill 3, if you guys don't know exactly which one this is here, it is his almighty skill, which does the most damage for anyone and also is the one that records the damage of the detective partner at hand. This is going to be really helpful for not only just his own damage here, but also help out the team, seeing if you are missing a little bit of damage, he is going to make up for that little bit that you're also missing. Afterwards, you then want to go ahead and invest into the skill 2, then the skill 1, and lastly his ult. This is pretty much the optimal way of actually building this character, and I would say try not to steer too far away from it, although you will be eventually maxing out all his skills accordingly. It's not really terrible. If a lot of you guys are wondering why I put the ult at the end here, it's not terrible. The ult's pretty darn good. It's just that's the last thing on your list that you really want to upgrade. At the end of the day, you have to think his arrows of chaos and of course clarity are coming from his skills, which you are able to gain from his skill 1 and 2, and then you have to use that skill 3 24/7 for a lot of that damage. So it's really just at the back of the time there when it does come down to what skills you really want to get up. But once again, you're gonna max out all these skills in the long run. So if you want to go out of order, suit yourself. I gave you the warning, but let's go ahead and move on. All right, so checking out the weapon options here for this character. Weapon wise, for at least Akechi, doesn't actually need his 5-star, which is very surprising. It's really good, to be honest. It's not too bad, and it's not like stellar either, but doing damage testing and things like that, he really just mainly benefits off the weapon himself rather than benefiting with the rest of his team. We do have to keep in mind that he is a sub DPS at the end of the day, so with that in mind, the 5-star weapon, although it is really good and does help out the team to some extent, it isn't a needed component. So a lot of you guys can go ahead and use the 4-star main weapon. I think the 5-star is more a little bit of a stat stick. But now we went over that, let's go ahead and actually go about what the 5-star does. So the 5-star is called Seraph's Heart. This increases his attack by 30% up to a max of 57% for a lot of you nut jobs who decided to max out the weapon. But alongside of this here, Crow then gains clarity and or chaos to increase all his allies' attack by 21% up to a whopping 40% if you max out the weapon for 2 whole turns. Now this may sound like a lot, at least on paper here, but in person it doesn't really equate to too much. Lastly, with the 5-star, it does come with one more additional effect here, that whenever you have the weapon, the detective's partner, whenever it does use a persona skill, a highlight, or even a follow-up, it'll increase Crow's own crit damage by 15% up to a whopping 28.5% for 2 whole turns to 2 whole stack. Now that is more of the deal why I say it's kind of centered more on Crow himself. Yes, he does help out at least his partners as well, but really, if you think about it, you're not really going to be helping out too many people here. You have to keep in mind that the main person that's going to be taking at least a lot of those helpful things here is going to be your other DPS or your main DPS. So everyone else inside the team are kind of just sitting around looking kind of nice, just doing their hair a little bit, but not really helping out the team, and those stats are going to waste. While Akechi himself is really just helping himself out with at least the stats that he does have and buffing himself accordingly. So there's not really a need for this 5-star weapon. While the 4-star weapon, which is easier to dupe, by the way, keep that in mind, easier to dupe and doesn't get outshined in SOS, 5-star weapon, but doesn't get outshined like crazy here. It does have all the values that you do need for his kit, alongside for the things that you need for the team. So let's go ahead and look into that. Now the 4-star weapon, which increases the almighty damage that you really do need to pay attention to, this actually increases up from 9.6% up to a 19.2% of almighty damage, which is more than enough that you need for this character, by the way, and is pretty darn easy to dupe once again, that you can easily get these copies anywhere. But alongside with this here, it does come with some additional stats. It also increases pretty much just the attack that you do need by 22% up to 43%, especially once you have that truth effect, which is one of the things that you'll have 90% of the time. so you don't have to really worry about that. I say if you're on a budget and you're really just trying to keep this character at A0, maybe even A1, the 4-star is all you really do need. So if you do plan on duping out Akechi in the future or already have him duped out, of course getting the 5-star will be somewhat better, but it's more of a stat stick or a meat stick where you can easily just go ahead and use a 4-star weapon and get the cooler design too. I'm sorry, it looks like a lightsaber. It's pretty darn awesome. So I mean, I would rather go with the 4-star at the end of the day, but that's just me. So let's move on to the next section. All right, so coming down to the last two parts of the video here, we're going to check out Akechi's best gear set. Now this gear set isn't really too much of a dispute here. It's pretty easy to know where it was going, and which is going to be the 4-piece disappointment set with the Freedom Universe card set as well. Now the reason for this is because the disappointment set, due to its 2-piece, firstly already giving us 12% extra attack to at least Akechi himself, which you will need this to hit his attack threshold, but it also then ends up giving him that 4-piece at least set effect that makes him even better. So pretty much what this ends up doing, if you do have the 4-piece set, which a lot of you guys should already have it anyways here, is when dealing persona damage or either persona skill damage here, which you will do a lot with Akechi. We literally have 3 attack moves with Akechi himself, so this is always going to be fulfilled. It will increase the current persona skill damage by 25% as long as the last persona skill that you use that actually damaged the enemy was a different element. Now, as I did say, Akechi you're usually going to be using with different elements of characters here, so there will be always times where you will have this always procced, and you don't need to worry about it being active or being inactive. As long as you're using the correct setups, this will be something that you don't have to worry about and will be a lasting effect throughout the entire fight. So really you're getting some free stats right there just by being pretty much yourself and doing what you need to do with your team setup. Then of course, if you do pair this accordingly with the universal card being Freedom, it'll give you an extra attack percentage being by 35%, and crit rates by 12%. And this is whenever you deal almighty damage, which luckily Akechi does have a skill all the way built about that. You're always going to be at least utilizing his 3rd skill quite often, so you really don't have to worry about this as well, giving you some more free stats to boot, which will help him out no matter what for his skill based attacks. So if you go ahead and think of it that way, the only thing we have to go over now is just his main stats and his sub stats. So let's pick apart the main stats first. Going with his main stats here, our detective should at least have these ones that I'm going to advise you right here. On the moon piece here, you want to have attack percentage with a star piece of crit rate as long as you're a 0. Though if you are a 1 and above here, you want to make sure that star piece is actually crit damage instead, getting more out of your values. Lastly, when it comes down to the final piece here, make sure the planet piece is an attack percentage, which gives you an overall blueprint of how you want to have this character actually built. Though difficult part really comes down to at least the substats, and so surely do keep that in mind. But let's go ahead and move on to this as well. Now the substats is a little bit expensive because I'm not even finishing with that. It's kind of one of the few reasons I don't like using the Akechi too much here as well, is substats have gave me a huge problem. Substats you're really going to want to look for is going to be crit rate percent being the first one, then crit damage percent being the next, going on to at least attack percentage, and follow up by damage bonus. As you guys can see, it is a bunch of just attacking or offensive related buffs here or substats, so you will need to take some hot amount of time to really get this actual stat effect, or at least this whole set effect, really done at hand. So do keep that in mind. And then of course, if you want the actual perfect stats for this, you need to follow these values that I'm about to state right now. In order here, if you want to make sure he is at the perfect amount out of battle, you want to make sure that he has 7,000 plus HP, 4,000 attack, 30% crit rate, and a max of 200% crit damage. Now this is already out of battle, so in battle the values do change just a little bit, and you will want to have this accordingly. In battle, you're going to want to equate to 8,000 HP, 5,000 attack, and 50% crit rate with 200% crit damage minimum. This is always going to be the main thing that you want to look for, and I'm not going to lie to you guys, I still lack in this department as well. So if you're missing these stats, don't worry, I'm missing them too, so it's not the end of the day. But now that we went over stats and everything that we need to go over, let's go ahead and go to the last section of the video. All right, so finally getting to the end of the video here, we have the best team comps for Akechi, which is probably the easiest part of the video as well. Now his teams are pretty straightforward, and being that as it may here, you really just use him with any generic AoE DPS team. You can use him with some single targets, but you're really going to get most of his use out of AoE DPS teams so try to build him around that. Now normally some of you guys may think he's bound to curse or bless here, which that is a fair amount of an assumption, though this character is not based on this, and that's also based because of his passives that really revolve on how his arrows do work. One of his teams very well can be a bless related team, but the other one can be curse and anything else, just depending as long as you have the characters. So surely do keep that in mind, especially when it comes down to utilizing whoever you want to use for this man's team. Eventually I do feel like that we'll have an official team for this character, but for now you guys can kind of just run wild and let your DPSs do all the hard carrying. But for now we're gonna go ahead and wrap up the end of this video here, in which it did take me a little while to go ahead and do this, and I am apologizing for that once again here. I've been kind of lazy when it does come down to some of these build guides, especially when it comes down to everything else, but I have been working on a few things for you guys, so surely do keep that in mind. I already have the infographics done for Turbo, and we're going to try and get her out as well as soon as possible, alongside as I have a tier list video coming up for you guys. Look forward to that as well. Those both will be getting uploaded fairly soon. But thank you guys for watching all the way through, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Peace.